Hi, everybody. Welcome to this special fireside chat on Autonomy by Arushi. I am your host and host, Arushi Uppal, and today we are joined by somebody who has been on the cutting edge of AI innovation, product execution, and purposeful storytelling across some of the most pivotal chapters in his tech career. Tushar Dadlani is a Carnegie Mellon alum and a seasoned engineering executive who's worn many hats, from co-founding Explorer.ai to leading high-risk, high-reward AI initiatives at Walmart. He's the brain behind Walmart's sensor fusion system, Multisignal, and has helped de-risk multi-billion-dollar bets on AI using computer vision and large language models across hundreds of teams. And today, he plays a new role as an angel investor and startup advisor, backing early stage founders who are building people centric tech and pushing the edge of deep tech, ML, and systems thinking. So, whether it is shipping velocity, systems strategy, or soul level design, Tushar's approach to product and leadership blends clarity, conviction, and care. And I'm so thrilled to welcome him and unpack his journey today. Thank you so much, Tushar, for spending your time with us today.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, so let's get into it. I think we're really curious to know that could you help us walk through your journey? Like, how did you first get into product management? And then what kind of made you stay in the field and in the role that you were?
Yeah, so I'm Tushar. I started my career being a site reliability engineer, just managing large scale clusters of computing systems. And then after that, I started my own company in the mapping space for self-driving cars. And that was when I was the CTO of Explorer.ai, and that was the first time I had to wear multiple hats as an engineer, as a product manager. Uh, and I think what I really liked about product management was the idea that you can connect technology to people. And sometimes, if you are in engineering, you are way deep into the technology. You're not necessarily looking at the people side of things. Or if you're too much into on the business side of things, you get too caught up on the people side of things and don't get enough time to spend in the technology. So I feel like product management allowed me to spend time in different areas without people asking you questions like, why do you have opinions about business, or why do you have opinions about technology? Like, if you're in between, you can share opinions openly about different aspects of being a product manager. So yeah, that's kind of why I got in, and that's kind of how I've stayed there.
Got it. That's very interesting to know. And then could you kind of, share what was one of the most maybe defining project or decision that you took in your early PM career that kind of probably has shaped your approach to product and problem solving at this time?
So I think for me, one of the earliest things was just being values driven and not necessarily being kind of outcome driven. I would just be very heavily focused on what is it that people want and how can I make it possible for them. And that meant saying no to over optimization on certain metrics without fully understanding the problem, not directly jumping into like solutioning, I call it letting the problem breathe a little bit before saying that, oh, this is a specific solution for a certain problem. And I think so it's been like many different projects, right? Like at Explorer, we were building a mapping platform for self-driving cars, right? So just if you take all those four words like mapping platform, self-driving cars, all of those have domains, all of them have technology, all of them have different elements, right? For different people, they mean sort of different things. So I think that almost like forced me to become strategic, both from a technology and product perspective very quickly, and not necessarily get stuck in the sprints or what are the Jira tickets or what are the things on the backlog, because the backlog was heavily driven by like the backlog can change, things can change all the time. And the power of technology is it makes you more adaptable. So if you're not building that muscle of adaptability, then you can't satisfy more and more future customer needs with your product. So you kind of are always not just trying to address what our current customer needs, but also predict what future customer needs might emerge. And are you building the right technology to satisfy them with the minimum amount of product lift in the future? So I guess that was sort of when I first started thinking about product from both a technology and business perspective.
Got it. I think you brought two very interesting points. One is letting the problem breathe and not over optimizing for your metrics. And the second was, you were always more values driven than being outcome driven. But when you work in the corporate, when everything means business, how did you kind of still hold ground to do these two things? And could you give us some examples to kind of really understand how did you apply and how does it kind of come in fruition in daily life?
So I think I can answer the values driven question first. And I guess mostly I had not worked at many corporates before, to be completely honest, mostly worked at smaller teams. So that was the other reason why I like smaller teams. I like early stage companies because there's no single definition of what your job is, and it's very open ended. And nobody questions why are you doing this other work because you are always resource strapped on everything. So you
Mhm.
always have opportunity to do things in other people's territory, so to speak. But as you go into a larger company, like people have very well defined territories, or this is product, this is engineering. And then you don't have as much freedom to say, oh, I want to do this other thing which looks interesting in the other side of the other part of the business. So I think that part of being early stage and at startups has always been something I've been really passionate about, building stuff, right? And I think to the second part of your question, which was, I guess the first
Like,
part of the question, which was, sorry, can you repeat what that?
yeah, it was about, let the problem breathe and don't
Yeah.
over optimize on metrics. Like, what do you mean by that?
Yes, I think there are two parts to that thing, right? I think the first part is what is the problem? Sometimes we over-index on the first problem we see and start solving it right away.
Mm.
Uh, but you have to solve it. You can't avoid solving it. But as you solve it, if you assume that is what is going to be the eventual solution, you are missing out on a lot of opportunities of greater potential value that you can provide to your customer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I was able to train some of that mindset of letting the problems breathe because as an engineer, I always know in the back of my head that how I can solve this problem. So I don't get too stressed on like how will this get done? What is the engineer like? How much time will this take to build? Right? That is a like that calculus is always running in the background in my head. Like if I say X will take more time to build than Y, and I'm like, oh yeah, we can say yes to X and Y because I know how to build both X and Y myself, or I know how to define the problem and I can predict how much time it should take to build that. So I think that allows me to kind of puts me in a unique position to let the problems breathe because I'm like, I don't get caught up in like the feature trap, like, oh, if I build this feature, how long will it take? Not having the certainty. So I think having that engineering background definitely always helps in knowing that part of it. And I think the second part is like just a deep like desire to have a very easy to use product and ease of user experience. I think a big inspiration for me is like if you look at the iPhone, right, as a product,
Mm-hmm.
it is very easy to use and design, but I also know the engineering behind it is very hard to build. So
Mm.
sometimes to create a very easy to use product, you need to solve hard engineering problems. It's not, you can't take those hard engineering problems for granted. So sometimes that engineering effort is worth it, sometimes it is not worth it. So you kind of are always trying to find that delicate balance of shipping a complete, easy to use product and putting the engineering effort in places that it matters rather than in places that might feel over engineered unnecessarily, right? So I think that's kind of how I look at letting the problems breathe, like like have a very easy to use product, understand the technology that goes behind building the product, and then accordingly adjust timelines in your head instead of having many conversations with many people, because I think that kind of gives me that superpower of being able to look at the problem not just from a like as the problem is being discussed, I have solutions happening in the back of my head and being like, oh yeah, this is how we can build this, this is how we can build this.
Mm-hmm.
uh, I don't know if that sort of makes sense.
That does make sense. And then, just to follow up on that, when you said that basically you adjust and kind of, keep brainstorming while you're thinking about the problem, and rather than kind of having a lot of conversations on the timelines, you kind of keep it a more adaptable kind of situation. So when you're working cross-functionally, right, maybe you have that skill of kind of being so adaptable, but maybe, the team or the people, your counterparts do need like kind of tentative deadlines, etc. And what I have realized after talking to early career PMs is also when you're early in your career, estimating the timelines and estimating things is a little, hard for them. So let's say, hypothetically, somebody doesn't come from an engineering background, is early in their career as a product manager, and is working in a heavy cross-functional team, then how can they apply this kind of system that you shared? How can they use it to their leverage?
I would say I think it's important to challenge engineering, but challenge with empathy, not with ego. I think oftentimes I have been on the other side and PMs come to me is like, how much time will this take? How much time will this other thing take? And sometimes I'm like, you can go and read up on this technology on your own before you come to me and ask me for a timeline. Like, I think sometimes I've seen PMs over index on meeting people, not realizing how much time it is wasting for engineering. And on the engineering side, I have also seen like them being more kind. I think that can also help, like understanding, like, okay, this person does not understand this. But I think it is somewhere in between where both sides need to have more empathy towards each other. But you have to challenge each other, right? You can't just be like, okay, sometimes because there is no empathy, you will get responses which are not real, right? So I think, especially in bigger enterprises, like if I'm wearing the engineering hat, I'm being a lot more conservative. If I'm playing the product hat, I'm being a lot more aggressive. But both sides, I am trying to be empathetic towards the other side of other counterpart that I'm working with, right?
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, speed matters. You have to ship products, you have to get them into market, and in some ways the salaries of engineering is being paid by revenue that product is generating, right? So in a weird kind of way, you are mutually dependent on each other to have your salaries continue coming in through some weird economic incentive structure. So
Hmm.
I feel like having those both sides having that empathy towards each other, but challenging each other, right? So engineering also challenging product, like why do we need this feature? And if both sides hand wave the details and are not clear, are not articulate enough, don't think about the problem enough. Usually it's like I've seen it come across when there's a lot of shallow thinking on both sides, and
Hmm.
it just becomes an ego battle, like, oh, I'm more superior to you, I'm more senior, hence do this. So I think it has to come from a place of empathy and kindness, and not from a place of ego, like, oh, this is like both sides have to think and then challenge, and not just mindlessly challenge or yeah. So I guess I don't know if that makes sense.
That does. That definitely does. And then, to kind of delve a little deeper, because I think you brought a very nice point about how you can do some research on yourself, kind of beforehand to make the meeting and the time more productive. Could you give us an example of, any one technology or any one thing that, let's say, a team is building, then what kind of research they want to do, what kind of questions they want to kind of, like understand about before coming to those meetings so that they can make a more informed estimate about the timeline or about how to deploy the technology.
So I think there is a benefit. A lot of times people just talk in like the first time are interacting with you in the actual meeting. And I
Mm,
think as a PM's job, it is to build understanding by talking to people over time, and not necessarily just showing up to the meeting unprepared. And by unprepared, I mean they're like, hey, this is what we're trying to do. If you would have spoken to three stakeholders, like who are actually going to do this before, you would actually have much better questions to ask, and you will actually be able to get to alignment in that meeting. Uh, and sometimes it is just a short conversation. You don't have to waste somebody's 30 minutes. So, in some ways, if let's say you're building a feature on authentication, right? And
hmm
you don't know authentication standards, or you have not read up about authentication, how does authentication work, what is the internal process, what is the external process, what are some core pieces of technology that need to be implemented for authentication. It feels like you're coming in and just asking me questions. Oh, I have to build authentication. I'm like, okay, I will build it this way in the shortest possible way. Uh, but having that prior understanding and being able to understand the technical domain sometimes is super valuable. And sometimes you don't have to. And I guess in today's age and time with tools like ChatGPT, Claude, you can do a lot of this research upfront and understand the space so that when you're asking them questions, you're asking very specific, targeted, deep questions and not hand wavy questions, right? Because at that point, as an engineer, I'm like, are you proposing the solution or am I proposing the solution and you're just taking credit for it, right? So I think there has to be some balance of that where people have done their background research. So, and I think I played that part as a product manager because I know the technology. I would just go and ask harder questions directly about the technology instead of hand waving details and wasting 3 meetings of the engineering side as well. So,
Hmm, got it. That makes sense. And then, we are speaking a lot about how PMs should be a little more proactive, informed, and, kind of ask, do the thinking and then ask the right kind of questions. After so many years of experience across different domains, what do you think is, one or two key skills, preferably soft skills that, you think make a PM a great PM?
hmm, interesting. I think I would say it's two things. One is empathy and second is curiosity. Uh, I think you have to be curious enough about the problem because as soon as you lose curiosity, you start coming across as egotistical. Uh, and you have to always lead with curiosity. And but you have to have empathy as well. You can't just be curious for the sake of being curious. And I think people are able to figure that like human beings are very good at understanding if you're actually genuinely curious or you are just asking questions for the sake of asking questions, right? So I think no, like it has to be authentic. Your curiosity and your empathy has to be authentic because you can sense when people are coming across as inauthentic in their conversations. So I would say those are sort of the two main uh, things that I would recommend PMs to develop.
Very interesting. And then, we were earlier in the conversation, we were talking a lot about really identifying the real user need with a lot of empathy and strategic thinking and really trying to solve a problem by focusing more on the value you create. So sometimes what happens is when the PM is really focused on a user need and, kind of they're really solving a deep user problem, it may take time or logistics which do not make sense for the stakeholders sometimes for different reasons. So, in your career, how do you think you've kind of got to a point where you can balance this stakeholder expectation with, your own process, your own problem solving, and if there's a conflict between, what you're really trying to do for the user versus the stakeholder expectation, how do you kind of navigate that situation?
I think that question leads to, like, I guess, one clear thing that comes out is like you have to prioritize ruthlessly based on whatever your prioritization framework is, right? And that prioritization framework itself is continuously evolving. So I think agreeing on a broader prioritization framework that this is how we make decisions. For example, like Apple, everybody knows makes design led decisions. So design is always going to make the final say in how things happen. Or at Google, it's largely engineering led decisions. So I think these things are like, so as a product manager, you understand that which stakeholder is more sort of important to convince about a certain need or a user problem. And that I think it's good to understand that part of the culture. Like, for example, when I was at Walmart, a lot of decisions are operations led because there is stuff happening in a store. So understanding the domain in which you are operating is very critical and which needs are always the highest, most important. So for example, even in automotive, right, safety becomes the number one user requirement in some ways, right? Like if you're building a car or something like that. So I think every domain has these underlying, like, I guess, principles of operation that you have to accept. You cannot fight those things you have to like work with those constraints and not say that, oh, we have to be a product led company, right? But a product is engineering plus design plus users plus. whatever, right? So I think you have to always think about it as what is the how is the stakeholder culture in our company like, and then accordingly adjust yourself to understand that okay, this is how things are going to operate and this is how things will be. And realize that if you want to change this culture, it's not a 1 day or a 1 week or a 1 month problem. It's a much longer arc of you're taking on a multi-year, multi-decade problem in sometimes, and that's if you want to stay at that same company for like a long time. So I think understanding that is very critical. And I think the second part is when it comes to users, right? I think having this approach that users don't always are not always articulate about what exactly they need. So
Mhm.
sometimes users are not speaking the truth and data kind of uncovers those pieces of truth. So you have to kind of be a little careful on what you listen to about like what feedback you take and what feedback you reject. And that
Hmm.
again, not and it's not reject, you accept it, but you don't act on it, right? That you basically your prioritization shows the user what is important, what is not important. So I think it's important to, as a PM, to understand that these things are different, right? Like, again, I was talking to somebody today about the cloud cultures, right? Like the three cloud cultures. Microsoft is a lot about sales first. So they will give a lot of engineers to you, they will onboard you. On the other hand, Google has traditionally been very engineering led. So when they won't give you too many solutions architects, so if you are a customer, you have to manually figure out all these things. Whereas AWS has been somewhere in between, where they will charge a lot of money for a potential solutions architect, but they will also provide you a solutions architect if you need one. So I think there is different companies approach these problems differently, but as a PM you have to understand these dynamics on how these companies operate, what are they doing, who's incentivized, how we are solving the actual user need. Is it a one-off solution, or is it a part of the product? Is it part of the broader long-term product experience, or is it just a short-term fix we are doing for this specific customer? I think those things come into from like a prioritization and understanding your stakeholder landscape.
Hmm. Very interesting. And then I think this, on a high level is a very good way to solve problem and prioritize. But I was just curious to know, out of the different prioritization frameworks that you have used so far, could you deep dive into one framework of prioritization or a mental model that you use? Or could you give us like a real example from your career where you made a tough product decision and how did you prioritize?
So I think in startups, it's slightly different from like big companies. So as an example, if you look at, let's take the big company example, right? So at Walmart, a lot of things, it's retail, right? Retail is the domain. And if you talk to anybody in retail, there are certain problems which are common across all retailers, like theft or loss prevention, or how much time it takes to check out, what product selection is available, how many times people are coming back to your store, be it virtual or physical. So there are all these things that are kind of like those are evergreen problems, like top three problems of a certain domain, which I think if you define those, if you understand that well about your company, you then then you start applying it on your day-to-day basis, right? So as an example, at Walmart, right, if you want to get scale, you have to be doing something for the physical stores because a large number of customers come from physical stores. Uh, but if you're at Amazon, you probably have to do a lot of stuff on the digital store side, like be uh, to make that scale of impact, right?
Right.
So you have to understand that like which parts of the business internally are more critical and which parts are less critical from a domain perspective, from your specific company perspective, and then using those things. I've kind of make those decisions. So there's no one single prioritization framework that works. You have to adapt to your company, to your domain, and then make those prioritize. Like it's very different for different companies. But for like startups, for example, it's a lot about product market fit, right? Like how can we get to product market fit quickly? But part of it is also product discovery, right? What exactly do people want? And I think that always comes from talking to a lot of customers
Mm.
or potential customers and you start building that intuition. It's not a very black and white, oh, I did 100 interviews and then I understood what product market fit is going to look like. Sometimes those 100 interviews teach that you don't have to, this is the wrong direction. So you have to,
Hmm.
again, like you have to be ruthless at just keep going till you feel it. Like it's almost like it's a feeling. It's not something you feel that, okay, I tried this prioritization approach, it worked versus it did not work, right? So I think being self-reflective, making notes, understanding patterns and things like that, then you just can really switch from one domain to the other, one company to the other, and your frameworks kind of hold true no matter where you go, no matter what size of company you are at. You are basically understanding the context in which you're operating as a PM rather than trying to make your own version of success defined in a certain organization. So if you have to understand context, you cannot ignore context when you're defining how you prioritize. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, that does. That's very interesting. And then when we think of somebody who, let's say, is an engineer by background and is now kind of transitioning to product management. So let's bring this episode to home by this one last question that what piece of advice would you give to somebody who is an engineer but also an aspiring PM and wants to kind of transition to the field? What do you think are some ways they can leverage their experience, or like how can they make that pivot?
I think that's an interesting question. I think the more I think about how to kind of make that transition, I think the first step is just work with the, like, at least make sure you're working with a PM on a team that has a PM and who understands product, and slowly start honing your own product thinking, right? Start thinking, well, like as you're writing a line of code, oh, which customer cares about this? Not necessarily line of code, but if you're working on a Jira ticket or something like that, like which customer does this impact? Does it make a difference to any customer?
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, everything that you do is for a customer. It could be an internal customer, it could be an external customer. And how can I make that person's life? Because you're at the end of the day, whatever code you're writing is to make somebody's life better. So you
Right.
have that kind of feedback cycle. Like you can get that information that did this actually make this other person's life better. So you can write a feature, ship it, and then maybe 1 month off down the road, ask the other side, hey, did this actually help your life, or was this useful, or was this not? And I think that simple, like, action of, or even asking the PM, right? Like, hey, did this actually make an impact, or did we waste time building this feature, right? So
Hmm.
that starts like honing your skill of like, okay, I need to question everything. Like I would like literally question every ticket I would see as like, how does this make a difference? Is this wasting my time? Like I would just be very ruthless about like, hey, this is wasting my time and this is not impacting a customer. Do we really even need to do this, right? So I think always challenging that, because that's kind of you're challenging the PM, right? Like, did you prioritize this properly, or did you just make up a feature that you felt like, is it a feeling based decision, or what raw, like what is
Hmm.
your thinking process behind it? It's not always
Right.
data, or it's not always like black and white as this was a data based decision or this is a user research based decision. What is your thinking behind, like, can you articulate your thoughts clearly? As that's why I feel like a lot of the good PMs write very well. Like
Mhm.
writing is a underappreciated skill. So
Right.
I think that is something that PM should really like, as if you're an engineer aspiring to be a PM, try to like look at your docs and say like, how can I make this more useful? Because that also has a, your docs also have a user, which is another developer, right? Like it's not,
Hmm.
you are not the only consumer of those docs or this code, whatever, right? Everything at the end of the day, you can apply this user lens to everything you're doing, and get feedback on everything that you do, right? Like, hey, what did you think about this function? Was it useful? Or what do you think about this module that I shipped? Uh, like there is a user, right? And you have to understand that. But you just keep moving up that user stack. First user could be your co-developer. Second user could be your PM. Third user is like another actual customer. So I think just thinking about that user lens from everything you do kind of helps you create that empathy and expand towards actual users and consumers.
Right. I think this was very helpful. Tushar, thank you so much for kind of pulling back curtains on your process to kind of really help us understand that excellent products come from designing inside out. So if you're listening and building, here's your takeaway, guys. It's not about moving fast and breaking things. It's just about moving true and building things that truly matter. Feel free to share this episode with one PM or founder who's navigating their own inflection point. And remember that sometimes the most powerful roadmap is the one that begins with the why. Until next time, keep building, keep questioning, and staying bold. Thank you so much, Tushar, for spending your time and insights with us.
Thank you.